The night that saved Emma Winters wasn't supposed to be remarkable. But sometimes, fate arrives quietly, with frostbitten fingers and desperate eyes. If you've ever felt lost, wondering if kindness still exists in this world, this story might just restore your faith. Before we begin this journey together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Emma's boots crunched through the snow as darkness fell, each step heavier than the last. 3 days homeless in December had taught her cruel lessons about survival, about invisibility, about the way people's eyes slid past her as if she were made of smoke. The temperature was dropping fast, her thin jacket useless against the bitter wind that seemed determined to strip away what little warmth remained in her bones. She hadn't always lived like this. 6 months ago, she'd had a job, an apartment, a life that made sense. But life has a way of unraveling quickly, a company bankruptcy, medical bills from her mother's final illness, and suddenly, at 27, Emma found herself with nowhere to go. Pride had kept her from reaching out to the few friends she had. Pride, that useless companion that wouldn't keep her warm tonight. Through the trees, she spotted it, a small cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with the promise of warmth. She'd been walking for hours in the woods outside town, having heard that an abandoned ranger station might provide shelter. This wasn't abandoned, but desperation makes decisions that caution wouldn't dare. Her fingers had lost feeling by the time she knocked on the door. When it opened, revealing a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a weathered face, Emma barely managed to form the words. "May I warm up by your fire?" she whispered, her voice cracking from disuse and cold. The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her trembling form, the backpack that contained everything she still owned in this world. Emma braced herself for rejection, for suspicion, for the door to close in her face. Instead, he stepped aside. "The fire's not just mine to give," he said simply. "Come in before you freeze to death." Those words, so ordinary, yet so profound in their acceptance, would be the first of many that changed Emma's life that night. His name was Jack Sullivan, a retired literature professor who had retreated to the woods after his wife's death 3 years earlier. The cabin was small but meticulously organized, books lining every available surface. As Emma thawed by the fire, clutching a mug of hot tea between her hands, Jack asked no questions about how she'd ended up at his door. Instead, he spoke of the novel he was reading, of the stars visible from his porch on clear nights, of the family of deer that visited his garden each morning. "You can stay the night," he said eventually. "The sofa's more comfortable than it looks." Emma slept deeply for the first time in weeks, wrapped in a quilt that smelled of cedar and safety. Morning brought awkwardness and reality. Emma prepared to leave, to continue her aimless journey, but Jack was at the kitchen table with 2 plates of scrambled eggs. "I could use some help around here," he said casually, not meeting her eyes. "Winter's hard on these old bones. The guest room needs cleaning out, but it's yours if you want to stay a while. In exchange for some chores." Emma recognized the offer for what it was, not charity, but dignity. A chance to be useful, to earn her keep. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Days turned into weeks. The guest room, once filled with boxes of Jack's late wife's belongings, slowly transformed into Emma's space. She learned that Jack had been a respected professor before grief had driven him to solitude. He learned that Emma had been studying nursing before financial disaster struck. Their routine developed naturally. Emma cooked and cleaned, Jack taught her about the woods, about identifying plants and tracking animals. In the evenings, they read by the fire, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Jack explaining passages from his favorite books with the enthusiasm of a man who had spent his life in love with words. "Why are you helping me?" Emma finally asked one night, the question that had been burning inside her since that first evening. Jack was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was soft with memory. 30 years ago, I was where you were. Young, desperate, nowhere to go. Someone helped me when they didn't have to. They saved my life with that kindness. He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. We don't own kindness, Emma. We just pass it along. Winter deepened. Christmas approached, and with it came Emma's first real challenge. Jack received a letter from his daughter, announcing she would visit for the holidays, the first time since her mother's death. Emma offered to leave, to spare Jack the explanation of her presence. You're not something to be hidden, Jack said firmly. You're part of this home now. Sarah Sullivan arrived with the first major snowstorm, her initial coolness toward Emma thawing only slightly over awkward dinners. Emma overheard their argument on the second night, Sarah's voice sharp with accusation. You don't know anything about her. She could be taking advantage of you. Mom would be horrified. Your mother would have been the first to welcome her, Jack replied, his voice steady. Not everyone gets the chances you've had, Sarah. The next morning, Emma found Sarah alone in the kitchen, staring into her coffee. I'm sorry, Emma said quietly. I know this must seem strange. I'll be gone after the holidays. Sarah looked up, her eyes, so like her father's, searching Emma's face. He says you're studying nursing books in the evenings. Emma nodded. I had to drop out. But someday, I hope. I'm a hospital administrator, Sarah said after a pause. In Portland. The conversation that followed was the beginning of a fragile understanding. By the time Sarah left 3 days later, she had Emma's promise to send her resume in the spring. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, not yet, but it was a door left slightly ajar. January brought the harshest weather, snow piling high around the cabin. Emma and Jack settled into their shared isolation, the outside world seeming distant and unimportant. She began to notice, however, that Jack tired more easily, that his breathing sometimes grew labored after even minor exertion. It's nothing, he insisted when she questioned him. Just getting old. But Emma had spent enough time studying medical texts to recognize the signs. One night, she found him sitting on the edge of his bed, struggling for breath, his lips tinged with blue. Hospital, she said firmly, already reaching for the phone. Now. The rural emergency room confirmed what Emma had feared, Jack's heart was failing. He needed surgery, specialized care available only in Portland. As they prepared to transfer him, Jack gripped Emma's hand. The cabin, he whispered. Take care of it until I'm back. Emma nodded, making a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. How could she stay there alone? How could she afford to maintain it? But Jack's eyes, clouded with medication but still sharp with concern, demanded her agreement. The next weeks were a blur of phone calls, of driving back and forth to Portland in Jack's old truck, of learning more about heart conditions than she had from any textbook. Sarah was there too, her initial suspicion of Emma giving way to grudging respect as they navigated Jack's care together. He's stubborn, Sarah said one evening as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. Gets an idea in his head and won't let it go. Emma smiled faintly. I've noticed. He thinks you saved his life. I just recognized the symptoms. Sarah studied her over her coffee cup. That's not what he means. He says you saved him from disappearing completely after Mom died. She hesitated. I was angry that he retreated to that cabin. I thought he was giving up. Maybe he was, until you showed up. The surgery was successful, but recovery would be long. Emma maintained the cabin, using the small amount of money Jack had insisted she take from his account. She chopped wood, kept the pipes from freezing, and drove to Portland whenever she could. In between, she studied, working through Jack's collection of medical reference books. Spring came slowly to the mountains, snow melting to reveal the first tentative green shoots. Jack returned to the cabin, weaker but determined to regain his strength. Emma had prepared everything, transforming the living room into a temporary bedroom to spare him the stairs. You've done well, he said, surveying her work with approval. Better than I would have. I had a good teacher, Emma replied. As Jack recovered, their conversations turned to the future. Emma had received an offer from Sarah, a job at the hospital and assistance with completing her nursing degree. You should take it, Jack said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. It's the opportunity you've been waiting for. I can't leave you here alone, Emma protested. Jack smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. Who said anything about me staying here? This place was my hiding spot. Maybe it's time I rejoined the world too. The solution, when it came, was both unexpected and perfect. Jack sold the cabin, using part of the money to buy a small house near the hospital in Portland. It had 2 bedrooms, a garden for Jack to tend, and was close enough to the university for Emma to attend classes. It's an investment, he insisted when Emma tried to refuse. In both our futures. 2 years later, Emma stood in her graduation gown, nursing degree finally in hand. Jack and Sarah sat in the audience, both applauding loudly as she crossed the stage. That night, at the small celebration dinner Sarah had arranged, Emma found herself seated next to Jack, both of them watching as Sarah chatted with colleagues across the room. I never thanked you properly, Emma said quietly. For that night. For letting me warm up by your fire. Jack shook his head. You've thanked me 1,000 times, not with words, but with actions. He patted her hand. Besides, the fire was never just mine to give. Emma understood then what he had meant that first night. Warmth, kindness, opportunity, these weren't possessions to be hoarded but gifts to be shared, passed from one person to another in an unbroken chain. 5 years after that desperate knock on a cabin door, Emma found herself opening her own door to a young woman, barely 20, with the same lost look Emma once had. The girl was one of her patients, recently discharged with nowhere to go. I have a spare room, Emma heard herself saying. Just until you find your feet. Later, as they sat in Emma's kitchen sharing tea, the girl asked the inevitable question, why are you helping me? Emma smiled, remembering Jack's words from that winter night that had changed everything. The kindness I'm showing you isn't mine, she explained gently. I'm just passing it along. And somewhere in Portland, in a garden filled with roses his late wife would have loved, Jack Sullivan smiled as if he could hear her words carried on the wind. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. In a world that sometimes feels cold and indifferent, remember that a single act of kindness can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Sometimes, all it takes is allowing someone to warm themselves by your fire to change a life forever.